This video will show how to import an image sequence into Synfig using a list file. That's a Lima Sierra Tango file. And also how to use time loop to loop an animation, in this case an image sequence. Generally there are two ways to start Synfig. One is using a form of GUI such as an app image or a PPA that has been installed, both of which should behave the same, except for a small difference that will be pointed out later in this video. So here I will be using the terminal to start Synfig, and this is Synfig 1.22. I'm going to change the canvas properties. Before importing the files, here's an explanation of them. These 8 PNGs are the images for the image sequence that will be imported into Synfig. These are the frames, and this is the list file that Synfig will use to import these frames as an image sequence and in order. So these are the contents of the list file. At the top, this will set the frames per second. So in this case, 5. Each one of these numbers in this list correspond to the images in the folder. These can be named, such as name _0. You can even do 0 or 01. Different extensions can be used, such as JPEG, but in this case, it will be PNGs. In order to make a list file, one way is to use a text editor. Set the frames per second, and then start the list, and keep adding names as needed. Back in Synfig, go to File, Import, Frames.list. I'm going to scale down this image. So this is the imported image sequence in this group layer using the list file. Now to add a time loop layer, right click on the layer, go to New Layer, Time, then Time Loop. Any layers underneath Time Loop will be affected by the parameters of Time Loop. These layers will be known as child layers to the time loop. On the left side, we have the parameters of the time loop. We have link time, local time, and duration. Link time will set the beginning of the loop for the image sequence in this case, but it will set the beginning of the cycle for the animation using the time corresponding to the animation or layer itself. In this case, the frames.list layer. So in this case, the link time will refer to the frames in the list file. So if the link time is set to 4 frames, then the image sequence will start on the 4th frame of the image sequence. Duration also refers to the time loop layer and its children. Duration is the number of frames or seconds that the loop will play for. Link time also refers to frames or seconds. So if the link time starts on frame 4 within the image sequence and the duration is set to 5 frames, then the image sequence will start on the 4th frame and end on the 9th frame. Then the animation loop will go back to the 4th frame of the image sequence and start the cycle again. So the time loop goes from link time for the duration that is set and then begins again at link time. Local time refers to real time or time on the timeline. So setting link time to frame 4 would equal the 5th frame on the timeline, 0 being the first frame. Right now the link time is set to 0 and so is the local time. The duration is 24 frames. So the animation should start at the beginning of the image sequence, end at frame 24, and then loop back to the first frame. Because the list file has the frame rate set to 5 and the canvas in Synfig Studio is set to 24 frames per second, each frame in the image sequence will be held for 5 frames on the timeline within Synfig, for a total of 40 frames played on the timeline. So with the duration of 24 frames, the time loop will not go through the whole 8 frames of the image sequence. Let me change the length of the timeline and I will show you an example. So by hitting play, the animation should loop. Now the duration will be set to 40. And again, the animation will loop. This time, however, all the frames come into play, all 8 of them, at 24 frames per second. So from frame 0 to frame 4 is the image sequence from the first frame to its 5th frame. And I'll show you an example of that right now. So the frame changes on the timeline's 4th frame. We can change the link time to 4, and that should set the change to occur from 0 to 4, or on the image sequence from the first frame to the 2nd frame on 1 frame on the timeline. And there's the change that originally took 5 frames, now in 1. Setting the duration to 5 should start the image sequence again, going from the first frame to the 2nd frame on 1 frame on the timeline, and then ending on the 9th frame. And the animation loops from that point forward. The local time refers to real time or time on the timeline, whereas link time and duration refer to the time in relation to the time loop and its child layers, in this case frames.list. Setting this to 32 should start the animation on the 32nd frame of the timeline. Setting the time loop parameters back with 0 for link time, 0 for look time, and 40 for duration should loop the entire animation once again. It's worth noting that setting the link time to 0 and the duration to 0 will freeze the animation. So currently the animation does loop right now. If we change this to 0, the animation will be static. Next, while rendering the animation is where the difference will be between starting Synfig from the terminal or starting Synfig from the GUI. So going to File, Render, Synfig can export to video files such as AVI using FFmpeg, but the process can be cumbersome and usually the quality is poor. Normally I like to render PNGs or pings as an image sequence, and then later I can bring those into either Blender, Kdenlive, or OpenShot and render or export to video format. Blender is actually good for creating transparent backgrounds and also for transforming the frames before render. Synfig Studio will show that it's rendering with this message. This is true regardless of how Synfig was started. But when started with the terminal offers some more information. It's going to be current. It will be the current status of the rendering process. And that's the difference between starting Synfig from the terminal or the GUI. Another way to check the status is to go into the folder that the frames are being exported into. Here the frames can be seen rendering in real time. Again, these frames can be imported into a video editor such as Kdenlive and exported or rendered as video files. That was how to import an image sequence into Synfig using a list file and how to use the time loop layer. Thank you for watching.